was invented, or maybe it was because we had grown too far from our dragon ancestors. No one knows. But somehow, after the floodwaters drained away, legendary emperors were no more, and we lost our ability to decipher the primeval language of hexagrams. And so eventually sages began writing descriptions and interpretations and evocations of the hexagrams, trying to articulate the possibilities opened by those dragon graphs. It was a kind of philosophical storytelling. First they gave the hexagrams names and evocative interpretations. Then they described and interpreted the individual lines within the configuration of each hexagram. Eventually, they described and interpreted the trigrams, the top and bottom halves of the hexagrams. And because those original hexagram interpretations were so mysterious, they added elaborations on those interpretations. These first levels of elaboration were hardly less primal and mysterious than the hexagrams themselves. Indeed, they seemed to establish the mysteries of the original hexagrams rather than explain them. They were, we might now say, poetry. Indeed, much of this text rhymed in the original. These are the layers of the I Ching presented here. Perhaps the most ancient of all Chinese texts, full of poetry and mysterious philosophy, alive somehow outside of time, both primal and postmodern at once. Several layers of later explanation were eventually added to the text, but unlike the original linguistic layers that function as literary text, these later layers feel like secondary commentary. Still, they were included in the book, and with that, the canonical I Ching was complete sometime around the 3rd century BCE. As the centuries passed, schemes for interpreting the canonical I Ching multiplied into the thousands, led by Confucian moralizing with its interpretive fantasies, which were also applied to the ancient Book of Songs, I Ching, where the simplest and most transparent folk songs were turned into rigorous allegories for proper ethical and political behavior. This was part of a widespread desire to use the I Ching for practical purposes, which began very early, for the book was seen from ancient times as a divination text that could instruct us about how best to proceed in a given situation. After the floodwaters drained away, there arose the Xia dynasty, about which little is known, followed by the Shang dynasty, 1766 to 1040 BCE. In the Shang theocratic worldview, all things were created and controlled by Shang Ti, celestial lord, an all-powerful monotheistic deity not unlike the Judeo-Christian God. Events could also be influenced by dead ancestors who were powerful in the spirit world, and so divination practices assumed that fate was determined by outside forces. When the Shang emperors grew tyrannical, the dynasty was replaced by the Zhou dynasty, 1040 to 223 BCE. Now, Shang Ti was the high ancestor of the Shang rulers, and he provided them with a transcendental source of legitimacy and power. In order to justify their rule, the Zhou rulers reinvented Shang Ti as the impersonal heaven, thus ending the Shang claim to legitimacy by lineage, and then the Zhou rulers proclaimed that the right to rule depended upon the mandate of heaven. Once a ruler becomes unworthy, heaven withdraws its mandate and bestows it on another. This was a major event in Chinese history, the first investment of power with an ethical imperative. The I Ching was projected into this historical transition when later ages attributed the early textual levels to major figures in the transition, attributions that are almost certainly false but did in fact shape the culture's development over millennia. According to this cultural legend, Emperor Wen, cultured, around 1150 BCE, gave the hexagrams names and composed the initial statements, while imprisoned for giving honest advice and criticism to the Shang dynasty's last tyrannical emperor. Wen was the sage ruler of the neighboring state of Zhou, and he laid the foundation for the overthrow of the Shang by his son, the Emperor Wu, marshal. Wen's other son, the Duke of Zhou, was a great philosopher and poet, the inventor of the mandate of heaven concept and the author of many poems in the Book of Songs. He is said to have written the evocative interpretations for the individual lines of each hexagram, and it was said later that other layers of the original text were written half a millennium later by Confucius, 551 to 479 BCE, the seminal philosopher who created the political philosophy that was a secularized replacement for the Shang dynasty's theocratic system. The transformation of the source of creation and order from an otherworldly sky god, Shang Ti, to an impersonal heaven was soon superseded in the philosophical world when heaven became an entirely empirical phenomenon, the generative cosmological principle that drives change.